Hey, today's Sunday, December 7th. Um, this topic might not be of interest to everyone, sorry, but I had an interesting discussion today. I was doing Uber, and the lady gets in, and she's going to the airport, and I said, of course, departures, what airline? She says, international. And I was just curious. I said, where are you flying to? And she said, Iowa. And that triggered some memory. I said, hey, I've been there many times. I used to be a trucker. And so she started asking me all kinds of questions about trucking. And her first question was, how do truckers get paid? And we were talking all the way from where I picked her up, like in the south part of downtown, to the airport. And she was saying that, I mentioned my YouTube channel, and she said, you should probably do some videos about this for, everyday people, because most of us, we don't know how the trucking industry operates, like how stuff gets delivered. She says, we often don't realize how it, like, we were passing a gas station, and I said, you see those windshield wash jugs? I said, that's the worst job I had was delivering stuff to gas stations, especially in winter, when you have to hand bomb those windshield wash jugs. And I said, and gas station owners normally, or managers, they don't appreciate your efforts at all, and you have to stock it, right? It's not just like you drop the skid in one spot. No, they want like 10 jugs in here, 10 jugs over there, the rest goes in the shed. And I'm like, basically, you have to be like a stock boy. But anyway, so I thought I would do like a video answering this lady's first question: how do truckers get paid? Because when I was trying to answer it, there was like, 3 different answers depending on whether you are a company driver, owner, operator, or whether you have your own authority, right? And something else I wanted to mention today, I got yesterday was my brother's birthday. Right, and I was debating whether to send him a postcard or not, since he's not exactly talking to me still. But some people gave me good advice, saying that I still should do it. Basically be a better man and all of that. And so I found a free electronic card online. And I just did, screenshot of that, and it just said happy birthday and then 55, because he turned 55, big number. And yeah, today I'm having some beer. The cheapest beer at my liquor store, $2.50 per pint. So trying to save some money and cut the drinking. So anyway, so today I got an email from my brother with one word: spasibo, thank you. So we are communicating, I think. I'm not going to bug him with questions, but at least it's good that he answered. So hopefully he'll send me a postcard in January on my birthday. But anyway, let's talk about this. So again, this is more for common folks who are not familiar with trucking, or maybe who want to get into trucking, right? And they're wondering, okay, how much money can I make? And so how do truckers get paid? So first off, normally you start as a company driver or employee, right? So you drive your boss's truck and you pull their trailer. And then eventually a lot of people transfer to being an owner-operator, as they call it. So which means that you buy your own truck and you still pull a company trailer, or you may get later, some companies allow you to buy your own trailer so that you can make a bit more money. And then, of course, the creme de la crop is when you become your own carrier, when you register your DOT number and your Canadian authority and all stuff like that, and you become basically a fleet of one. And so company drivers, at least from what I know, and I work for Challenger Motor Freight. That was my first company. Then I worked for McKinnon. Then I worked for Landstar in US, and I already was owner operator because I had my own truck, my own trailer. And then they kicked me out. In 2013, I became owner operator again with Premium Ventures. And then after that gig, I became my own boss, so I registered my own authority. And so I have a good, feel about different types of payments for different roles. And so back then in 2005, when I started with Challenger, it was about 35 cents Canadian per mile. That's how truckers were paid. You paid by the mile, even though we're in Canada and everything is supposed to be metric. And they push you to do 500 miles at least or more. And it's up to you. I know some people, they like to, I remember one crazy guy, he was always aiming for 600 miles. But, that's a lot of miles because you're not exactly on the highway, on the freeway all the time, at 60, 70, 65 miles per hour, right? There's stops, you have to stop to take a leak and stuff like that. So basically, if you work like 12 hours, 11 hours, yeah, you can make 600 miles. But I was always shooting for 500, which is, even that requires more than 8 hours, right? Because, your average speed with all the, border crossing and some inspection stations, it's never 60 miles an hour. At 68 hours, you can do 480 miles, right? But back then, 500 miles times 35, so that was $175. That's it. So times 5, right? If you work a week, that's only $875 a week, or $1,750 in 2 weeks. I make much more money now as a company driver because I am paid by the hour. And that's what, by the way, most local drivers, that's what it is. Local drivers, most of them are paid by the hour. And I know some companies that actually give you a salary. So no matter how many hours you drive, how many days you work, you have a salary, like annual salary, But company driver, long haul drivers, especially those that go into the States, it's always cents by the mile. And so it was 35 cents back in 2005. So now I had a couple of passengers again in my Uber. The guy was a trucker, and we were comparing notes. I said, well, when I started, it was 35 cents. What is it now? And I think he said, depending on the company, it can be anywhere between 50 and 65 cents. And of course, if it's just dry van, it's lower because you just basically close doors. But if it's a flatbed or RGN, of course, it's more. But the general rule is that when you're a company driver, they pay you per mile, so cents per mile. But imagine now, so let's say you drive 500 miles a day times 65 cents. If you can find a company that pays you that, that's $325 a day. That's pretty good. So that's $1,625 a week, or $6,500 a month minus tax. So probably you'll end up with like $5,500. Now, when you are owner operator, so you buy your own truck, like what happened to me, right? I was driving on 401 in Ontario, always passing that international dealer in Woodstock, west of Toronto, and this yellow truck was sitting there, captivating my attention. I would go west towards the U.S. border in Michigan, and then I come home, I drive east, and I'm looking at that truck because it looks so great. It had very low mileage, as I later discovered. What is it? 165,000 miles, or like basically 300,000 kilometers. Inside, it was like new. All plastic, the seats. I love the truck, and it had a cat. As again, I later learned. But that unusual, crazy color, yellow, was grabbing my attention each time I was passing that Woodstock dealer. And eventually I stopped by there, and they helped me get into the truck, right? And so now I have the truck, and that's when I changed from Challenger to McKinnon, because Challenger also accepted owner operators, but their pay was lower, and McKinnon, I think, what was it? It's like $1.10 per kilometer or something, or I mean per mile. So yeah, when you have your own truck, it's still cents per mile or dollars per mile now, because you pay for fuel, you pay for all repairs. But some companies, like the Premium Ventures I worked for after Landstar, they paid percentage, because percentage sounds better, right? Although what they don't tell you is that they have company drivers, right? And so the best loads will always go to company drivers. And even though I had like a nice aluminum step deck, I was getting some, lumber, bricks, roof tiles, all the cheap stuff. But the good stuff was going to company drivers. And that's why I always said, whenever somebody was asking me for advice about what company to go to work for, I always advise to avoid companies that have company drivers, okay? Because like Landstar, it's only owner operators. But if you have a company driver and then owner operator, of course they make much more money if they just give it to the driver, because they pay him like 35, 40, 50 cents a mile. And so all the best loads would go to them. And so, but still, the principle is, so this 85%, what they promised us was BS, because it was 85% of cheap loads, But that's how they get you in. They get you in by high percentage. Hey, we'll give you 90%. 90% of what? Of the BS that company drivers refused, But so again, so as owner operator, you paid cents by the mile, but now it's usually like $1. At least back then it was like $1.10 for regular runs. And then if we were going into Northeast, like busy, like New York State, like busy area, there was like a map. I think they paid us like $1.40 or something, like there was a surcharge. And then of course sometimes both company drivers and owner operators, they would get extra pay, like some companies will give you extra. I think this was a Challenger when I first started, like loading. When you reported, loading, unloading, there was a premium, like, they'll give you a few bucks, like, I forgot, $30, $40. Then when I switched to McKinnon, I started pulling a flatbed. So you would get extra money for tarping. If the load requires tarping, I think it was like $50, $60, whatever. But again, so it's still cents by the mile, right? Or in rare cases, percentage of the load. And so that implies that you trust the company to apply your percentage to what they get from the broker, usually, right, from the freight broker. And I remember I was somewhere in the States, and they gave me a load, and the rate just didn't make sense. It was so cheap, And I called them. I said, guys, can you email me the invoice, like your paperwork you have with the broker? I just want to see I just want to confirm that the rate is that. Oh no, we don't do that. Like this, I'm pretty sure like these guys, the Premium Ventures, they were, I'm positive that they would be getting paid in US dollars, right? But they would tell drivers that it's Canadian dollars, which is a huge difference. It's like 1.3. I'm pretty sure. But basically, these guys, I think they're crooks. They were crooks. They would refuse to email you any paperwork. And they said what they told me. They said, we will show you any paperwork you want, but you have to be here in person, which is Orangeville, Ontario. And let's say I'm somewhere, I don't know, Houston, Texas, What, do you want me to drive to Orangeville just to see the paperwork? Of course. So basically, that was their trick, not to show you the actual number. So I have no idea, but I was pretty sure that they were they were cheating. They were cheating. They would say, let's say the load pays $3,000 US. They would tell me that it pays 3,000 Canadian, which is a difference over $1,000. So yeah, you gotta be super careful with percentage deals. I think it's better to be paid by the mile, because then at least you know what you're getting. You drive 500 miles, $1.10. Well, I'm pretty sure now it should be probably close to like $1.50 or something. So let's say 500 miles, you drive it, $1.50. That's $7.50. That's already, interesting. So yeah, and then when I became my own boss, when I registered the Sergey Drachev Heavy Haul, and I got my Siri, relax. Like my phone started flashing. Siri thinks I'm calling her name.
You can do that in the Contacts
app. So anyway, so one more way to get paid that most people never heard of that term, factoring, right? Factoring. So when I became, I'm baking some potatoes in the oven. So when you become your own boss, right? So let's say you have your own company, you have your DOT, so now you're dealing directly with freight brokers, or if you're lucky, you have some contacts among shippers, which would be ideal. But what's fun is that, you would think that if you deal directly with a shipper, bypassing the freight broker, that they would pay better. But what I discovered and what other people told me, that shippers that don't use freight brokers are usually cheap. That's why they don't want to use freight brokers, because of course freight brokers want their cut, right? They want a fee like 10, 15, 20%. And so my gig, I usually dealt with brokers. I would just use truckstop.com, and then a couple of these load boards, and you deal with the brokers. But how do you get paid? If you want to wait for the money from the freight broker, it can be 30 days, 40 days, even 60 days. And so instead, I found a solution in the form of a factoring company. And factor, hey Siri, what does factoring mean?
As a noun, factor means a circumstance, fact, or influence that contributes to a result or outcome. Do you want to hear the next one?
Yeah.
As a noun, it means a number or quantity that when multiplied with another produces a given number or expression. Want to hear one more?
Yes.
As a noun, it means any of a number of substances in the blood, mostly identified by numerals, which are involved in coagulation. Want to hear one more?
Yeah.
As a noun, it means a business agent, a merchant buying and selling on commission. Want to hear one more?
No, thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
So basically, wait, are we still recording? Yeah, so basically, factoring company or factor, instead of sending your, let's say you deliver the load, right? You get the signature on the bill of lading. There's no damage, nothing, right? So you take the bill of lading, you take a picture, but instead of sending everything to the freight broker, you send it to the factoring company. Like the one I dealt with was Riviera Finance, because they're international, and I was dealing with a Canadian office. But what was cool is that they worked both with American and Canadian freight brokers, and the charge was 5%, but I would get paid on the same day. So basically, instead of sending my bill of lading to the freight broker, I send it to the Riviera Finance. And I remember if it's before 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the money is in my account around 2 p.m. on the same day, which is like of course, yeah, 5%. Some people say, are you crazy? You're giving away 5% of your money. But it's the instant cash flow. And another important thing is that you don't have to chase or track freight brokers. Let's say you send them an invoice, and now you're waiting 30 days till they pay it, and then you have to keep an eye on when each invoice is due. Then if they don't pay you have to chase them. That's BS. Like for one man company like what I was, it's much better to use the factoring company, because actually what they do is, before they agree to factor that load, you have to get approval. Usually you would go to their website and you would type in the DOT number of the freight broker, and they'll give you like a color scheme answer. If it's like a green color you see on the screen, it says approved up to $5,000 US. If it's like yellow, you have to call in. Red means that they will not factor. And so let's say I get a green answer saying that, yeah, they're okay to work with this freight broker. But, let's say they approve him up to $5,000, but the amount I'm agreed on with the broker is like $10,000, right? So I just call. I call the factoring company and say, hey, this is Sergey Drachev Heavy Haul. I got an approval on your website, but the amount is more. Can you confirm that you will work with them? And so they put me on hold. They talk among themselves, like throw down some vodkas or martinis or whatever, and they come back. Yeah, sure, it's good. And so, which is super important. So before I pick up the load, I have an approval from the factoring company that this guy will pay me. Basically, I have an approval that, like, why would they agree to work with a broker? Because they expect him or her to pay them, right? Because this 5%, that's how they make the money. And so basically they served as my first line of defense, and I don't have to chase anybody. I know if these guys said, okay, they're good. I take the load, I deliver the load, I get the signature on the bill of lading, boom, send it to the factoring company. If it's after 10 a.m., I get paid on the next day. But 2 p.m. was always it was either 1 or 2. I think closer to 2 p.m. Eastern time. I check my account, the money is there. $10,000, $20,000, $15,000, whatever. Like Heavy Haul was paying. By the way, another thing is that the ideal rate was basically going by the axle, right? When we're doing Heavy Haul. So depending on how many axles the load required, 7 axles, 8 axles, like the ideal rate would be $1 per axle per mile plus the cost of permits. But it was pretty much impossible to get that because all brokers are cheap. But, that's the ideal. So let's say I'm hauling a Cat 330 and I need 7 axles, right? So that should be 7 axles, $7 per mile US plus permits. But I don't think I ever received that much. Normally, at least you're lucky if they just give you $7 per mile, because that's already pretty good. But I think nowadays the rates are really down, and especially because of tariffs. There's not much going on in the trucking industry. But yeah, when I was there, 99% of the loads were between Canada and US. There was not many loads inside Canada, even though I could do them, but my focus was US Canada. So I hope that this video will be of interest to some people that are considering getting into trucking or just curious how pay in the trucking industry works. And that was your answer. Thank you.